From WisPolitics in Madison, you're listening to Capital Chats.
Hello, everybody. This is Kate Morton with WisPolitics here with a Capital Chats podcast brought to you by Spectrum. Today, I'm here in the Madison office to share an interview I did with Angela Lang, who is the Executive Director of Black Leaders Organizing for Communities. We talked a little bit about the upcoming presidential election and the Black vote, but here's the interview. All right, Angela, well, thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, so to get things started off, we're just going to talk a little bit about the impact of the Black vote in 2024. I wanted to talk a little bit about President Biden's efforts to reach out to Black voters. He's visited several times. He's kind of targeted Milwaukee as an area he wants to appeal to. I guess, what kind of issues do you think he has to focus on to kind of appeal to Black voters?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I've spoken about a lot of times is that I feel like the president has a little bit of a messaging problem, and there's like a little bit of a disconnect from what he's been able to accomplish during his term as president and how folks actually experience and feel that impact. And so I think a lot of it is getting that message out, having folks, see the direct benefits for, say, like the ARPA dollars and how that directly impacted folks, and child tax credit, things like that. So I think people need to just like connect those dots. People need to kind of feel that a little bit more too. I know there's always this talk of that the economy is doing well, but folks that I talk to are still struggling. They're still working hard and paying a lot for things like childcare, if they do have access for it. Groceries are still expensive, so people are still struggling. And so I think I would caution the campaign of not celebrating too early, because then folks don't feel reflected in that success.
Yeah, are there any other issues? I know you mentioned the economy that you think are really important to the Black community going into the election.
Yeah, I mean, some other things that we've heard specifically are things around policing. We know that there hasn't been a ton of movement around the George Floyd and Policing Act, unfortunately, but that doesn't mean that the president shouldn't still be advocating and fighting for these things. Are there things within his executive authority that he can do while, Congress is able to sort out some of their dysfunction? And I think people are also paying attention to voting rights. That also has been stalled. The John Lewis Voting Rights Act, that's something that I think is very important for our community, understanding the history and the legacy of voting rights in our community, and to be able to solidify it so we don't feel like we, generation after generation are having the same type of fights over access and democracy for the Black community.
Yeah, I was going to bring up the whole voting rights issue, and in particular, voter disenfranchisement. Would you say that that's a concern going into the 2024 election, particularly for the Black community? I guess, we saw some issues in Milwaukee in the past with polling place closures, like things like that. Are there any concerns like that coming up?
Unfortunately, there's always those types of concerns. The big thing that comes to mind is that this is the first year that the Midtown polling location on the north side of Milwaukee has been moved. And so, although we've had a couple elections for folks to get used to that, we still want to make sure if they didn't catch those elections, they're aware that that polling place did in fact move. And we also heard that if people aren't regular voters, their polling place may have changed if they're only used to voting in presidential elections and with the new maps and redistricting. So I think there's an educational component there as well. But unfortunately, we also have seen, attacks on groups like Souls to the Polls that are giving nonpartisan rides to voters, and that the Republican Party is attacking them. We see folks like Bob Spindell, who is a fake elector and bragged about low voter turnout being down in the Black community in 2022. He is able to help administer the elections in Wisconsin. And so, with some of these folks in different positions and some of the tactics and leaked emails and text messages that have come out, sometimes it can be hard to have faith in the process when there are things like that happening. But we do understand that there's also an educational opportunity to let folks know that there are guardrails. This is a reminder of civics and how things a lot of times go to the state Supreme Court, which is also very partisan and politicized as well. And so I think it's always a challenge to make sure that we're reassuring folks that the process will be fair. And we are always going to be making sure that us and our coalition partners are working together and keeping an eye on any type of voter suppression tactics as well.
Sure. Do you think that voters have a sense that their vote counts? Are you at all concerned about people not being motivated to get to the polls this election?
You, I do think that people think that their vote counts just because of the demographic and the state that we live in. There's no way to really win a statewide election that doesn't come through Milwaukee, and specifically that's Black and brown voters being the majority of the city. And a lot of times, I tell my team no pressure, but it comes down to the doors that they're knocking, the conversations that they're having, as well as a lot of coalition partners on the north side and south side. So, as Milwaukee can go Wisconsin, and as Wisconsin can go the country, and that line directly comes through the north side of Milwaukee.
Yeah. I know there's been some polls recently that are kind of citing concerns about lagging support for Biden from Black men specifically. I don't know if you saw over the weekend, but US Rep. Gwen Moore actually said she thought that was BS. I guess, what are your thoughts? What do you think of that?
I mean, there's always going to be, the Black Republicans and Black conservatives, and good for the Republican Party finally understanding the power that Black men and the Black community actually have. But unfortunately, I do think it's a little bit too late. The same party that is trying to suppress our votes and limit our voice is quite literally trying to get our support at the same time. Those two things don't actually go hand in hand together. And I have confidence in our community's political analysis that we understand that, former President Trump has done nothing but alienate and further harm our communities. And so, yeah, there's always going to be some, our community, just like everyone else, we're not a homogenous community. We've always kind of seen the same kind of folks around cycle after cycle. But I don't think that it's something that folks can overcome without more and more canvassing, more and more conversations, and more dialogue.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention you were at a Juneteenth event at the White House recently. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what your impressions were of that event and the Biden administration, how they're handling this.
Yeah, it was kind of surreal, to be honest with you. It all happened very quickly. I got an email on Thursday that this Juneteenth celebration was happening at the White House on Monday. And so I was able to go and attend. And I'll say that I was a little, hesitant at first because I know there are some folks that aren't quite endorsers of the current administration and some of their handlings around certain issues in Gaza. And, for me, I had to think about it. And I also decided if I'm going to go, I should go there with a purpose. So I intentionally wore my keffiyeh. Didn't know how it would be received, but I got so many outpouring of support saying thank you for taking up this space and being here at the White House, sending this message and signaling that. A lot of us, we only, had solo tickets. We didn't have a plus one. So it was cool to kind of make some friends, see some other Wisconsin folks, and listen to some good music like Patti LaBelle and Gladys Knight. And I saw Dougie Fresh dance with Maxine Waters, Congresswoman Maxine Waters. So it was a good time. But then what I appreciated is that there were these different portions in between the different segments that gave a little bit of history, that talked about Reconstruction, that talked about slavery, that talked about the civil rights movement, and kind of talked us through the history of Juneteenth and how we got here. And I think it was a sobering moment for a lot of us, understanding as Black folks, we are on the White House lawn celebrating Juneteenth. Our ancestors helped build the White House in so many different ways. And I think that moment wasn't lost on us. And it was good to make connections. And the vice president spoke, and the president, they both talked about the importance of recognizing Black history and how it's American history. And so I think a lot of folks were grateful to be there, make those connections. But at the same time, I don't think a lot of us had a glowing endorsement, at least some of the folks that I talked to. We're still looking for more room and more conversations on some of those issues that I mentioned before.
Yeah, sure. I guess if you had to give the Biden campaign any advice on how to appeal to Black voters, I guess would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I would say The conversation always just starts with just listening. And I know the president and the campaign, they've been to Milwaukee and Wisconsin several times, and it's good to know that we are a priority within the campaign, and they also understand the political landscape and the importance of Black voters. But some of those events are more kind of curated. They're rallies, they're invite only. But how do you get to the real voter, maybe that undecided voter, that single mom that's struggling to provide and want some reassurance from the president that he is going to act upon those issues. And so I would like to see a little bit more of that, getting to the average voter. It's great to go to the White House every once in a while to celebrate Juneteenth, but invite other people that actually need to hear some of these things and might need to still be persuaded as well, not just kind of the usual politicos.
Yeah. Well, is there anything that you want to add that you think people should know about the upcoming election?
Only thing I would add is that, this is an emotionally charged year. It's going to be an emotionally charged election with Milwaukee hosting the RNC in about a month. It's going to be very challenging to I think to connect with folks and to have honest conversations, but I think that doesn't stop us from talking to our friends, our families, our neighbors about the importance of election and why we personally are showing up and what's at stake. So everybody has a role to play, whether you're a part of an organization or not. Everybody has a wealth of connections and folks in their circle that they can talk to as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you for joining me on the podcast today. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, everyone, that's it for today's interview. In the meantime, if listeners want to learn more about the upcoming presidential election, they can head to our website at wispolitics.com. But I'm Kate Morton. Thank you for listening to WIS Politics Capital Chats, brought to you by Spectrum.